Hi, everyone. It's Carrie Brummer here, and I welcome you to another episode of How to Be an Artist Creator Profile. And I'm really excited today because I have a guest that I think is going to bring so much value to this community. We're welcoming today Patricia Young. She's a licensed clinical social worker, and she specializes in working with HSPs, or highly sensitive persons. And we're going to talk about what that means. I think many of you in this community are HSP and may not even know it. And it's actually this superpower if we better understand it and kind of learn more about what it means to be HSP. And I want you guys to feel empowered by some of the qualities that make up HSP. So thank you so much, Patricia, for being here. Welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I am too. So I know that some people in this community may have read the book by Elaine Aron called The Highly Sensitive Person. I don't know that everyone has. So can you tell us a little bit about what it means to be HSP?
You bet. So there's a formal definition and an informal definition. And I love to start with the informal, which is if you've ever been told that you're too sensitive, you're too dramatic, you're too intense, you think too much, you worry too much, you need to get thicker skin, you might be a highly sensitive person. And it's something that we're born with. So it's not due to trauma. It's not due to wounding or injury. It occurs in about 30% of the population, 20% of the population. My brain and my mouth don't always work well together. Dr. Aron estimates 15 to 20% of the population. So 80% of the world are not highly sensitive. So we often feel like misfits, the black sheep, the truth tellers, because the way that we come wired is we notice so many more details than non-HSPs. So often our sense of reality is very different than the non-highly sensitive person. And go ahead.
I was just going to reinforce that that's one reason I think so many creatives are HSP and don't necessarily realize it. We're very attuned to detail and observation. And I think sometimes that can be really overwhelming. And then we can also feel very vulnerable around this and then put ourselves down or even shut down our creative practice because we're so overwhelmed by these feelings.
Right. There are 4 core characteristics. I'll try and make this brief. Before we started recording, I said, once you get going, I'm kind of like a little steamroller because I get so excited. So I'm going to try and keep the reins in. But Dr. Aron defines 4 core characteristics that really make up the trait of being highly sensitive. And it spells out the acronym DOES or DOES. So D is for depth of processing. We're deep thinkers. And so on the negative side, you might have been told you can't let things go. You can't shrug things off. You ruminate. It's just because we process things very deeply and we have a more active insula. Like this is how we're wired. It's not that we're just being picky or something. This is literally how we're wired. So oftentimes we take more time to pause and reflect before we make decisions. Sometimes we just want to take in a lot of information before we respond because we really want to get all the aspects of something before we jump in. The O is for overstimulation or overarousal, which is exactly what you're talking about because we take in so much more information. And I had somebody on my podcast and she talked about, these aren't exact numbers, but I just like to use them. So in the brain of a highly sensitive person, we may be taking in 20 pieces of information in a situation because our brain is lit up in all these areas where a non-HSP is maybe taking in 5 pieces of information. And I had an experience with my husband who's not an HSP. We did this thing and it was really uncomfortable. And he kind of couldn't understand why I was so upset about it. And I really had to think well, I've got 20 pieces of data and you have 5. So often our sense of reality is challenged. If I were not an informed and educated HSP, I would have thought maybe I'm making a big deal out of this stuff. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. Maybe I'm being too emotional. And I'm clear, those 20 pieces of data that I have, it was a really weird situation. So being informed and educated is really important. But because we take in so much information, I can see I'm already on my little steam train.
It's great. Keep going.
I'm just so excited. We do get overstimulated and overaroused. So our ability to be out in the world, oftentimes we need to have time to come home and retreat, to replenish. Because we're just, it's like we're just kind of taking in stuff all the time.
Yeah.
The E is for emotional responsiveness or empathy. So we have more mirror neurons. We feel things more deeply. We don't like watching animals get hurt or children get hurt. We often don't like scary movies. If we hear sirens, it can be upsetting because we associate that with somebody getting hurt. We tend to not like to get startled. Like that's not really a fun thing for us. I can't watch the news because we're deeply feeling. We just have more empathy, and it can make it hard too to set limits with people and set boundaries because we imagine in their favor how they're going to feel hurt as opposed to tuning in with how it's going to help us. And we often have a challenge with conflict. We're really good at knowing what other people need because we are so perceptive and tuned in. And often the way that we survived was to figure out what other people needed. So we're really good at it, but being able to know what we need and to take care of ourselves can be challenging if you haven't done your work. And then the last one is awareness of subtle stimuli. So we're going to notice things in the environment more than non-HSPs, and brain scans have shown that that's emotional responsiveness. I have a little cheat sheet because I get so excited that I kind of screw up. So that was a little mistake. I'm perfect. So we notice subtle details that other people miss. So nonverbal cues, small changes in the environment. This is kind of a double-edged sword that oftentimes we will pick up on something, but the story that we make up in our heads may not be accurate. So if you and I are having an interview and maybe you had something uncomfortable happen this morning, your panties are too tight, you had an argument, your stomach is upset, I may pick up on something, but if I don't say like, hey, Carrie, is something going on? Then if I'm talking about something that's personal, what I may do is go like, oh, when I talk about personal stuff, it makes Carrie uncomfortable. I better not do that. So this is one of those things that can work either for us or against us because we do notice things, but the reality around what it is may not be what the meaning that we're attaching to it.
I already felt like I should have a notebook out and be furiously writing everything down, or just have a tick box to be like, yep, that's me. Like so many of those things I connect with. And I'm sure many people watching this too are like, oh my goodness, it's okay to be sensitive. It's not weird that I hate loud noises or I don't like violent movies. You know, there are so many of these things where I feel like, you know, our family, well-meaning or not, sometimes dismiss how we feel or the way we perceive the world. And then that also impacts our desire to take risks in our lives, even with things like being creative.
Yep. Well, and what the research shows is if we have difficult childhoods, we have a higher rate of anxiety and depression than non-HSPs. This is anecdotal on my part. I believe it, but I can't back it up. But I think all it takes is having a parent, like for us to be feeling something and a parent to go like, stop worrying about it. Or, you know, don't be so sensitive, shrug it off. This is how we're wired. And our parents are supposed to teach us how to be in touch with our feelings, how to regulate, how to manage our feelings. And if they're not tuned in or they don't have that skill, just those our parents can be very well-meaning, very well-intentioned. We could have wonderful childhoods.
Right.
And for the people that tend to not like their sensitivity, there's usually what I call wounding, which is kind of where this happens. So if you hate your sensitivity, you hate your responsiveness, it's probably because there was wounding and you're more identified with the wounding than the amazing strengths that we have being highly sensitive.
Yes. Amen. I already am so excited about this. Yeah. So Patricia, tell us, where does all this passion come from? What inspired you to go down this path of studying and supporting HSPs?
Well, 50% of people in therapy are highly sensitive. What that says to me is we want to know about ourselves. We want to figure things out. I'm a therapist by trade. I do coaching now so I can reach more people. And I found a method that's really effective in working with highly sensitive people. But when we don't know, we also have a really strong inner voice, like that little inner narrator that's always, commenting on what's going on. Like most people don't have that. But we don't know because we've got, this constant internal dialogue, like we have really rich internal lives. And I always knew there was something different about me and I felt like something was wrong with me. And when I learned about it, it was just like, I literally went back and rewrote the narrative of my life with the lens of being highly sensitive. And I was with a group of other highly sensitive therapists and realized like, I really have a very deep understanding of what this is and feel like this is where I want to make my mission. And I really, my passion is I want everybody to know about the trait of sensitivity. I want people to know that it's an amazing strength. We're loyal, we're conscientious, we're creative, we're the healers, we are great listeners. The world needs highly sensitive people, but the story around sensitivity and even the name highly sensitive, people think of emotional and dramatic and you can't control yourself. That is so not what it means to be highly sensitive. And so like, I just want to change what the narrative is around it and provide education so that if you have these traits and you hate some of the things about it, you do the healing work that you need to do so you really can thrive as a highly sensitive person.
Mm.
And when we do our work, our capacity to deal with things that we're not initially able to do really can increase. And so, I used to not want to go out and do stuff. I've gone to a couple conferences this year. I went to a brunch with people that I didn't know. There were 50 women there. Like if you had said a year or two ago, do you want to do this? Like, oh, heck no, I don't think so. So as we work with our traits, we really can expand our capacity so that we can experience more of life as opposed to it's too much, it's too people-y, no thank you.
So tied to this, you've created a podcast all about being highly sensitive. Will you tell us about it?
No. I'll sing it from the rooftops. Yes. It's called Unapologetically Sensitive because I really want us to be okay about how we are. And I do a combination. Really, I started out doing interviews because I felt like I don't have anything to say and I can't carry a podcast on my own. I'm about 10 months in now, and now I do a ton of bonus solo episodes because I do have a lot to say and I'm incredibly passionate. And the bonus episodes tend to be really vulnerable posts. Like I had something happen with a long-term friend. And what I know how to do is to sit down and record when something happens. I do sit on it before I release it. I do have that amount of self-control. And the episodes that I'm like, I don't know if I really want to release this are the ones that resonate the most with people. I think people are wanting honesty and vulnerability. I really believe about breaking the shame and, talking about our gremlins, and that's how we create freedom. And because we have so much that goes on with us internally, it gets really noisy, and being able to talk about what's going on helps to take the noise out of here. And it just becomes so much simpler when we can talk about what's going on.
Yeah, I really like your combination of interview and your own kind of self-reflection or just storytelling and kind of, I don't know, getting us to think about our own choices and behavior and how it all connects, because it really offers people not only just kind of external insight from other people, but also a window into how you're processing. And I do think that really helps people connect. I'll make sure, guys, that you have a link when this video is done below the video so that you can take a listen. I do recommend Patricia's podcast. I found it very helpful and very insightful.
Thanks. I really am transparent about what I struggle with and how I navigate through things because I just don't feel like we have enough of that. You go to social media and it appears that everybody's having these amazing lives where they're connected and all this stuff. And nobody talks about, being at home eating ice cream all weekend because it feels like it's just too much out there. And so I really am passionate about using what I struggle with to help people see, like, this is how I go through it. And it's not that we don't struggle, but it gets to the point where we're like, yeah, had a hard time yesterday. Yeah, had a big reaction today, as opposed to like, oh my gosh, that's about breaking the shame.
Right. Yeah. And I think too, it's such a good way to kind of separate ourselves from our emotional experience, because we don't have to be our emotions. We can experience them and honor them and move through them. But sometimes I know myself, I can have a really hard time when I'm really triggered by an email someone sends me or a post on social media, someone comments on something. Sometimes it can be really hard to not ruminate and let go.
Right. Well, and I think it's really all about self-compassion. That, what happens is I'll have I did an episode about like, if this happens, this is how you lean into it. And then within 2 days, something else happened. And like I reacted. And then I judged and felt like an imposter because like, here I've got this podcast. I just told you like, if this happens, this is what you do. Right. And like, I'm stuck in my own stuff. Right. So I did an episode about it because we judge it and we feel like we shouldn't be. And that the feelings get really stuck as opposed to like, yeah, having a hard time today kind of sucks. Oh, yeah, well.
Exactly. Yeah. So I feel like my next question was, do you find creatives that tend to be highly sensitive? But I feel like we've already answered that question. So what are strategies you feel highly sensitive creatives could use to harness this as a strength rather than seeing it as a weakness?
I think the most important thing is to become an informed and educated HSP. If people are curious, you can go to hsperson.com. There's a self-test there. If you think you're highly sensitive and you don't hit the cutoff, Dr. Aaron suggests to take the child version of the test and think back to when you were a child. I think when we know that this is how we're wired, and if we've got wounding, we do the work around it, then it's not a problem. Like I had a situation with my husband where I wanted a room painted in the house, and he'd painted one room, and like I could see the old colors sticking through and a little bit of stuff on the ceiling. And I didn't want that in the new room. And he's like, "You're really picky." I'm like, "Yeah." I'm really detail oriented, and those things I'm going to notice. And I don't want to be thinking about the yellow paint and the stuff on the ceiling when I'm in this room. I want to experience joy. Could I live with it? Yeah. Do I have to? No. Had I not done my work, I'm sure that every time something would come up, it's like, yeah, that's because I'm so picky. You got to do your own work so that yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Listening to one of your episodes, I hadn't really thought about, it's been a long time since I read Elaine Aron's book, and I forgot about sound being a potential trigger. And it just brought me back again, because it's so funny, because my husband likes to listen to the TV loud, like he'll talk really loud on the phone. And for me, that's so abrasive. And I don't know, it's just part of my nature. So I'm constantly asking him to turn down the radio or turn down the TV. And for a long time, I was like, maybe I need to just get over this. And of course, there will always be situations where I can't ask or people can have the right to say no too. But I feel so much more permission to understand that it's okay that grates me, and that that's just part of my, I don't know, my system and what, feels overstimulating or not.
Yeah. Strong smells, bright lights, loud noises. We can be sensitive to textures. I don't talk about this as much because this is a small part. And I think people think that this is a big part of what it is. But yeah, we are going to be more attuned. Like I used to keep earplugs on me because things just would be too loud, and it's not really polite to walk around with your, with your fingers in your too loud.
We talked about this a little bit before we went live, but many people in this community are returning to their art's passion after years or decades of being told that their art is not important, or they've been told it's not valuable for them to spend time on this as an activity. And I find that there are a lot of people who are very vulnerable around the risk-taking and inevitable failures that actually come with being an artist, whether or not it's a failure in terms of, growing your skill and working towards new levels of skill, or applying to exhibit your art or sell it and ask for that sale. Can you speak to this a little bit in terms of an HSP perspective?
Sure. I think we want to get things right. We want to get things perfect, which can often hold us back. One of my favorite mottos is done is better than perfect. And it can really be a challenge because we want to wait until it's perfect. And what I know is I've grown so much since I started this podcast, because it's just brought into consciousness how many of the things that I struggle with. And what I'm learning is, like, we need to feel the fear, feel the vulnerability, and do it anyways. Not so much that it undoes us, but when I did like my first podcast interview on somebody else's podcast, I felt like I was going to throw up. Like, that's a vulnerability hangover. And we may get vulnerability hangovers initially, and finding ways to know that it's okay to have those feelings. And if we wait until we have the courage or the confidence, it's not going to happen. And so we really need to find ways to increase our distress tolerance and know that, like, I'm going to feel afraid. Like, I just went to this conference. I wanted to go the night before. I go through this thing. Like, I don't want to go. This, like, I literally was counting up, like, how much am I going to lose in airfare and in a hotel if I don't go? I know myself, like, I just get nervous. And I went and had an amazing time. And again, my capacity for being around 3,000 people in a very people-y environment, I figured what I needed to do. So it's not about waiting until, like, we feel like we're ready. It's about feeling the fear, feeling the whatever it is, and doing it anyways. And that's how we build up this muscle. What happens is the volume goes down. We may or may not ever have this, like, I've arrived. And when we do, then we usually get the gremlins coming and are like, who the hell do you think you are?
Definitely.
And you just know that that's part of the process. So you have people that you can talk like, oh, I'm feeling like a fraud again.
Right. Yeah, I really want to emphasize what Patricia just said there too to all of you watching. She just said you gotta own that it's there and go for it anyways. And that is part of the process. That is part of the journey. There's
Yeah.
nothing that means that there's something wrong with us or that we're doing the journey wrong in some way because we're having these experiences. It's a natural part of growing, learning, and putting ourselves out there, especially with something that we care about.
Yeah.
And people here really care about art,
Yeah.
and that can feel very vulnerable in general for everyone because it feels like an extension of our person, putting it out
Yeah.
there for people to see. And social media makes it so easy today for people to offer unasked for criticism or just tell you they don't like your work, and that can be really scary. And we get to decide how and when we present that work, and how and when we deal with responses that might ultimately show up that we don't like.
Right. I just was working with a client who is an artist, and her mentor had said, like, if you don't work on on your creativity 4 hours a day, like, you are never going to be anything. And she has fibromyalgia. She has a lot of HSPs tend to have a lot of autoimmune disorders. And she felt like, if I stop, it's really hard for me to get back into it. And we really had to look at, like, that's a very fear-based model. I mean, Carrie, I don't know what your perspective is. So if I'm rubbing you and your community the wrong way, like, sorry,
No.
it's a very fear-based idea. Like, if I'm saying I want to write a book and I'm not doing anything, well, I probably need to come up with a plan. And so having a time to write every day is a way to get somebody that wants to do something and doesn't know how to start. But as highly sensitive people, we've got to honor our rhythms. And I've got like, my son is going through something. He's 19, and like, my little mama heart hurts. And I've had to slow down the last couple of days. I just know that I don't have the bandwidth to deal with other people's stress and drama, and my little mama heart hurts. And so I need to slow down. And so we need to take that trust into our process, that if we're tired and we need to rest, that fear of like, oh, I'm not producing. When we rest and take care of ourselves, that allows the creativity to come back in. And how many times have you been doing dishes or doing yoga, or you're on a walk, and like, you get this great inspiration for something because you're not sitting efforting trying to be creative.
Exactly. Yeah, forcing things and feeling like, again, you failed or something's wrong if you don't adhere to an initial goal we set for ourselves, I think can be very limiting, and also kind of limit our joy and experience of the journey and creative process, because then we're not allowing ourselves to be flexible and adjust to the discoveries that come with making. And that's not just in an artwork, but just being a creative person.
Yeah, I think for many of us, some things come very easily. And so we kind of expect things to come easily. And when they don't, I mean, this is true for me. Like, I try and it's like, well, that didn't work. Screw that. And I can really see how I'm working on building that muscle, because we have very high expectations. We get disappointed very easily. People tell us, lower your expectations. It just doesn't happen. I mean, with things that I know that I have a high expectation, I can lower the bar. But the truth is, most of the time I'm like, oh, I had an expectation, I didn't realize it. Like, okay, and shake it off. So knowing how we're wired, I think, really can help too. So we have these strong responses and we get thrown by them. It's like, okay, just got to, pivot and try again, pivot and try again, pivot and try again. And we don't hear enough of that.
Mm-hmm. Something I've been trying to use in terms of language in the community is saying, let's treat all of these things like experiments rather than this goal, like that's I don't know, just such a like boxed in idea where we feel like there's only one version or one result that's valuable. And personally, I found this practice of thinking about my art, putting myself out there for both the art education community I have here and my own artist practice, when I see, okay, well, let's test this idea. Let's experiment with this idea. I don't feel as much fear around the risk taking, and I don't feel as much judgment when it doesn't turn out how I expect.
Yeah, it's about the process and not the outcome, but we're so outcome driven, that I have to produce something that is ABC, as opposed to, I'm just going to enjoy, the process of whatever it is and see what happens. And if it doesn't work, then I'll, try GEF or, whatever. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
What's something you wish more people understood about highly sensitive people, or about being highly sensitive?
It's an amazing strength. It really is a gift. And there are so many ways that when we are an informed HSP and we If we've got wounding, I mean, I think we all have wounding. I have a lot. I've been in therapy for a lot of years. My therapist didn't know about the trait of being highly sensitive. So I really think the first thing is to become an educated and informed HSP. If you've got wounding, find, someone you can work with that is familiar with the trait of high sensitivity. Because once you know that, then you see the strengths. And then when somebody goes like, oh, you're so sensitive, you go like, yeah, what does that bring up for you? Looks like that makes you feel really uncomfortable, because it's really not about us. It's really about other people. And when we feel confident in who we are, we're like, yeah, what does that bring up for you? I have times where I feel more vulnerable. I have times when I'm not able to be assertive. I have times when I'm making up stories in my head. I don't live a perfectly charmed life. And, I've learned to sit with the discomfort. And if I can't say something for a couple of days and then I can, then I do. So it's really about having so much self-acceptance and knowing like, yeah, I'm kind of in that hole again. And, the hole isn't as deep and as bad and I don't stay in it as long. And it's okay when I go there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommended practices or strategies that you see people that you coach using regularly that seems to help them kind of regulate or be a little more self-compassionate?
I mean, breath work is always really important. Breath work is so important. Mindfulness above anything else, like radical self-compassion. And if we're feeling resistant, to own the resistance. I don't want to create. I don't want to clean the house. I don't want to exercise. Like I'm just resistant and I don't want to do it. Like it's okay to name that. There's so much power in just naming what's going on. I have that thing with paperwork, and I had paperwork sitting on the table for a couple of weeks, and I finally just called the person and said, like, I am so sorry. How I'm showing up for you is like not how I show up in the rest of my life. And it must feel awful for you to have to chase me down because and every time they call back to give me information, I won't pick up because I get overwhelmed. But it's like naming it like, okay, now
Right.
I can stay on top of it. But we have these little things that are subtle that we just kind of like shove under the rug, and they kind of rub against our integrity or how we want to show up. And then it kind of chinks away at us.
Mm-hmm.
And so just really being able to name what's going on, to have radical self-acceptance about it, to be informed about our traits, so that we can really start to embrace it. And if you need to work with somebody or do some reading, like whatever you need to do so that you know who you are and how you're wired and you feel good about it. And you may get pushback from other people, and that's okay. It's their stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you already gave me the links, and I'll make sure links to everything we're talking about today are below this video for all of you. But I'm curious, you mentioned a couple episodes you had on creativity on your podcast. Can you talk about them briefly?
Right.
Here?
I think episode 8 with Rachel Moore, she talked about creativity. She's a local therapist in town here. And then I understand you had Grace Chan on.
Yes.
And so she was on, you'll link to the episode. It might be
26. I think it was 26. I just saw my email.
Okay.
So
okay. It's 26. So those were really good episodes. If your listeners, can I pitch something?
Yeah.
I have an online HSP course. I have a scholarship slot available. And so if you listen to the most recent episode, bonus episode 54, it'll tell you, I think episode 37 talks about the course. But if you're interested in a scholarship, I've got somebody gifted a scholarship that on Sunday I'll do a drawing. So you want to jump on it if it's interesting to you.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for offering that.
Yeah.
So I have one more question, but before I do that, I just want to thank you, Patricia, for your time, for your wisdom, for your wonderful passion and enthusiasm for talking about this very important topic for especially our creative community here.
I kind of come alive when I talk about it. I'm like, oh, let me talk about HSP.
Yeah, that's how I feel about art and art education.
Yeah.
It's so lovely when people are doing the work they are called to do, and it's very evident that that's what you're doing.
Oh,
so
thanks.
Thank you. So our last question is, what does it mean to you to be creative?
I think creativity takes so many more forms other than what we traditionally think about. And so it can be gardening, or like spending time with my dog is creative. Mm-hmm. It can be cooking. I mean, I just think that, and I think what I know for HSPs is we tend to be great at problem solving. We tend to I ask my guests about play, and a lot of people go like, huh. I think our definition of play is a very extroverted social model. Mm-hmm. And so many people say like, I love solving puzzles, or I love solving problems, or I love sitting down and writing, or I love reading. That often we tend to be more intellectual and like love to use our brains. And so, and we don't count that, like that doesn't count. That doesn't, there's no tangible thing. So I think that creativity takes all kinds of forms, and whatever really brings us joy is creative. Like my office sits, I have a bank of windows, and I came back from this retreat and I realized how much I miss nature. I don't live in nature. So I put up a hummingbird feeder. I got a flat bird feeder because we have squirrels. It took for, like, I kept asking, like, what's squirrel crack? Like, I kept like, what can I get that's like crack for squirrels? I have a squirrel now that comes, the squirrel is probably 3 feet from where I sit, and it will sit in this feeder. It'll pop up. And I watch this, I take videos. Like I'm glad it didn't come up, because like I'd be like, oh, look at the squirrel. I get so much joy out of watching this little squirrel in there. So whatever brings us joy, just go with it. It can be baths. I mean, it can be anything.
I totally agree. That's a wonderful
Yeah.
way to end this episode. So thank you everyone watching for joining us for another episode of How to Be an Artist Creator Profile. Again, one more time, I'll make sure all the links that Patricia mentioned, as well as her website, are linked below this video so that you have access to it. And I'd love for you guys to keep the conversation going. Is there a big aha moment that you've had? Are you HSP and didn't realize it? Tell us more in the comments below, and let's keep that conversation going. Thanks again, guys, for being here. And thank you, Patricia. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.